Impressive. Well, the gospel reading is referred to as Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount. But if you go to the chapter before this, you see that Jesus was going all around Galilee. He was teaching in their synagogues. He was proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. He was curing every disease and illness among the people. His fame spread to all of Syria, and they brought to him all who were sick with various diseases, and he cured them. And great crowds followed. So imagine this huge crowd of people before Jesus. And Jesus looks out at this immense crowd, and what does he see? Scattered before him are the broken, the destitute, the sick, the dying, the persecuted, those who mourn, and those who have been taken advantage of for their entire lives, those whose hopes for a better life have been dashed to pieces by the reality of the world they live in. And Jesus calls them blessed. How in the world can they be called blessed? Because in the eyes of God, they are blessed. Jesus doesn't see a bunch of losers who can't provide for their families. He doesn't see people who don't have the courage to stand up for what they believe in. He doesn't see people who are in the eyes of the rich and the powerful and the religious leaders at that time as insignificant or even pathetic. No, Jesus sees things very different than we do. He says to the poor that they will inherit the kingdom of heaven. The ones who are in mourning, he promises that they will be comforted. The meek, he says, will inherit the land. And the merciful, they will be shown mercy. He tells the peacemakers that they will be called children of God. And those who hunger and search for righteousness, that is, a right relationship with God and their neighbor, they will be satisfied. He tells those who have been persecuted for their right relationship with God and their neighbors that theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And those who may be dressed in filthy clothes, who are not pretty to look at because of the scars this life has showered upon them, but somehow, through it all, they have remained pure and clean in heart, their very souls. He tells them that they will see God. God hears the cry of the poor. God always hears the cry of the poor, because when you are poor, hungry, lonely, sad, humble, persecuted, when you suffer from sickness and even from the death of someone who you loved, you realize that you will never come from this world. Your survival will never come from what this world will give us. That the emptiness you feel will be filled, but instead of material objects, instead of the favor of men and women, it will be filled by God who never gives up on you and never stops loving you. For God does notice, and God will act. A few years ago, I was helping out at Luke House, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Luke House, it's a program that feeds mostly homeless, but anyone who's really poor and can't afford food. They feed them lunches and dinners, and churches in the area bring food there for them to do it. They have kind of a schedule. St. Dennis has belonged to that for indefinitely. And I was working there a few years ago, and I don't know what it's like right now, but when I was there, this is how the system worked. You would come, and you would work in the kitchen preparing plates of food, or you might be serving the plates or clearing off. Everybody had a specific job to do. And the best part of it was they would circulate that crew into the table so you would get a chance to sit there and eat your lunch or dinner with the visitors of the homeless shelter. And you wouldn't have an apron on or anything. You would become like, the anonymity was great because no one knew who you were. I could have been someone who was poor that was coming in to eat. So I was at a table of 4 men, and they were all homeless. And one of the men said to the other, hey, I don't see that scooter that you have anymore. You had this little motorized scooter that you drove around. And he said, yeah, that scooter, he said, here's the story with that. It was all he had in this world was a little motorized scooter and a backpack. But one day, he made a mistake, and he parked in a no parking zone. And he didn't know what was going on. He came out, and it was towed out. It was gone. And because he's not familiar with the system that we would know about, call the police, he tried to identify where it was. He called around, and after a couple of weeks, he found that the police had ticketed it, and it was towed, and it was impounded somewhere. And so the fines were astronomical, just astronomical. There's no way in a million years he could pay it off. So he took a taxi with his remaining little funds, and he drove to the place of impoundment. And the receptionist, asked him what he needed, and he said, "You impounded my scooter," and he told her who he was. She goes, "Yeah, here's the fines and the storage fees," and he's not. I can't pay that. I know that. And she said, "Then we're going to keep it." And he goes, "I understand that, but it's not going to be any use to you if you don't have the keys to it. So that's why I came here and take this taxi to give you the keys. Here they are." The stunned receptionist took the keys, and the man left. He told us it was the right thing to do. According to Jesus, that man embodies what it means to be in the kingdom of heaven. Looking back, I now marvel that I once met a man who was in the process of inheriting the kingdom of God, a man who will be shown mercy because he lived mercy. And I met a man who has seen God. So, what do? I live in a comfortable home. I have never been without food. I enjoy clean drinking water. I go on vacations. And I enjoy a caramel macchiato from time to time, as everyone else does. Am I bad? No. Jesus isn't calling us to be poor or homeless or hungry. He isn't calling us to give everything we have away. But he is calling us to action, because Jesus embodies action. What does Jesus do before he gives his famous Sermon on the Mount? He does the same thing he did before he gave the Sermon on the Mount. He spends every waking hour not just speaking blessing, but living blessing. He gets his hands dirty by touching the untouchables, by restoring sight to the blind, by making the lame walk again and the deaf hear. He drives out demons from tortured souls. The poor have the good news proclaimed to them. Hungry are fed. He empowers the meek, and he raises the dead. Jesus gives and lives blessing. As followers of Jesus Christ, we are called to take Jesus' lead, to give and to live blessing. And there are so many people in our lives that need blessings, aren't there? The people who suffer from the agony of the loss of a loved one, for instance. Or those who suffer from a life-threatening illness and the pain and fear that they feel every single day of their lives. The ones whose marriages are filled with sadness and perhaps even abuse. Those who live in fear that they are only one paycheck away from being homeless. The lonely, the sick, those who experience mental health issues. Children who suffer from being bullied, and children who now live in a society where they no longer can feel safe anymore. The list goes on and on and on. My brothers and sisters, there are so many people in this world that yearn for someone to come into their lives and bless them. Not just with words, but more importantly, with action. May you be the one who does just that.